afternoon, everybody. Can I just have your attention just for a moment, please? Thanks. First of all, my name is Liam Herlihy, a farmer in partnership with my son in West Walford, the Cork-Walford border, and I'm chair of the Teagasc Authority. So at the outset, I want to say a very, very special welcome to you all, but a very special welcome to our Minister for Agriculture, Charlie McConalogue. I think at the very outset, you will all agree with me that we've had a most enjoyable and informative day today. And at the very outset, it is only appropriate that we say well done to Paul Crossan, who is Beef Enterprise Leader here at Grange, and to say well done to Paul and to his entire beef team for their commitment to the beef sector and to the manner in which they presented profitable beef farming to us today. Any organisation is only as good as the people, and as chair of the Teagasc Authority on behalf of all of us, I just want to say that we are really proud of the manner in which our Teagasc team presented their facts and figures to us today. It is important that I acknowledge the presence of Sinead McPhillips, the Assistant General Secretary of the Department of Agriculture. Sinead, thanks for your presence. And like all events, I'm saying this maybe with a little smile because I wear that little hat as well. An organisation or a day like today will always acknowledge a little bit of sponsorship that will come along the way, and that comes from FPD. And I would like to acknowledge the presence of Michael Berkery, chair of the FPD Trust, who will always come up trumps for occasions when it comes to promoting the well-being and sustainable well-being of agriculture. One thing I would say, and my words are very, very few, but I think what is important for all of us as stakeholders in the beef sector is that it is an important part of rural Ireland. It's a very important part of the vibrancy of every single parish, community, through the length and breadth of this country. But what is also important is that we ensure that it is done in a sustainable way, but profitability has to be a key role. And the keynote in today's presentation was sustainable from the point of view of environmental sustainability, but also profitable beef farming and optimising grass production, which is the keynote of all of our grass-based systems here. So with that, I just want to say thanks for your presence. Before we move any further, I want to say really appreciate the presence of our Minister for Agriculture, Minister McConalogue. And on a day like today, it is important to acknowledge his constant commitment to the beef sector and indeed to all of our Teagasc programmes. And that is something that is very much appreciated, whether it be in Leitrim, down in Thomastown and Kilkenny last week, here today. He and his department are fully supportive of our Teagasc beef initiatives and programmes, which are ultimately for the betterment of all of the beef stakeholders. So Minister McConalogue would like you to come to the podium, and if you don't mind, when that is over, I will we'll give you, the audience, the opportunity of asking a few questions, maybe 2 or 3, but if you wouldn't mind, we will keep the questions within the confines of what's relevant to the beef sector, because the theme today is all about beef. So with that, Minister McConalogue, please.
Thanks very much, Liam, and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with yourself and Director of Teagasc, Frank O'Mara, and indeed all of your team. And it's a pleasure to have been here today and to be joined earlier as well by Ministers of State Hackett, and Minister of State Hayden, and Minister of State Damien English, who all attended here for events, very much recognising what an important event in the annual calendar that Grange Beef is. And I want to recognise the work of all the team in terms of putting this on today. It's a really, really impressive setup. You couldn't do and couldn't plan for the weather, but it certainly has played ball really well, and it has certainly made the day really enjoyable for all. And I know from talking to everybody here so far that they've enjoyed the actual event, being able to be out and about again after so long in terms of being able to have events like this, and also really impressed across the board by everyone, or by all of the research and science and advice that is here. And of course, that just doesn't happen for today. That's the product of ongoing research, investment, and hard work and effort by all on the Teagasc team. And so thanks, Frank, thanks, Liam, for that. Thanks to all the team, and thanks to Paul Crossan and his team here for all the preparation in advance of this. I want to also recognise, I'm joined by Assistant Secretary in the Department, Sinead McPhillips, who's the Assistant Secretary in charge of beef and livestock within the department, also led out on our Food Vision 2030 strategy, which Frank would have contributed significantly to, as indeed did Alice Stanton here, who was a key and important member and is on the panel today as well, and thank you for that. And welcome many members of the farm organisations I see here. I was chatting to Dermot Keller and Edmund Graham of ICSA earlier on, and they weren't, as you would expect, weren't missing the opportunity to list their priorities, nor indeed was Brendan Golden or Flora McCarthy or Michael Biggins either from the IFA, and so it's good to see so many of you here. Also, I recognise as well the role of FBD in relation to sponsoring this event, and Michael Berkery, the FBD Trust chairman here. And I think certainly what I've picked up over since I arrived is certainly something which I have detected strongly over the last number of months in my time as Minister as well, is that a sense of togetherness within the sector despite the challenges and uncertainties that we're all facing. And it's great to see so many farmers displaying that camaraderie. And that sense of togetherness is really important, and indeed that sense of unity is going to be important for the time ahead as well, because for the suckler and beef sectors they are really crucial, and they're the ones which I have a great commitment to myself, coming from a suckler and beef farm in County Donegal, and it is very much the backbone of a multi-billion sector, which supports a huge amount of local businesses, whether it be the transport box maker to the barber to the local co-op. The suckler cow and beef animals keep the wheels of our rural economies turning and thriving. And it's crucial that while we face into a period of considerable change and upheaval across the agriculture sector and the wider economy, that we remain that united force. Our suckler and beef are very much valued greatly by government and by me as a minister. And I know no more so than our MC today, former Minister Ivan Yates, who would have had a very strong commitment to them during his time as Minister as well. So when I read an article in the media yesterday where an economist was arguing for the reduction of the beef herd as some sort of a sacrificial lamb to meet our ambitious and challenging climate targets, that certainly annoyed and angered me, as I'm sure it did many of you. We recognise, thankfully, that dairy farmers have been obtaining very strong returns from the market in recent years, and many beef farmers have chosen to convert to this sector given their land type and circumstances in the last few years. But while not without its own risks, the move has worked for many farmers, and that has been good to see. But it doesn't mean that I or the government will in any way turn our back on beef and suckler farmers. Quite the opposite, indeed. I've backed them with new and innovative schemes in the new Common Agricultural Policy Plan. And while convergence will impact on some farmers, this was largely out of our control, as you know, in Ireland, and we sought to keep distributions to a minimum while making the next cap as farmer-friendly as possible. I followed this up by setting up the new Suckler Carbon Efficiency Scheme, which will replace the outgoing Beef Data Genomics Programme. And that new scheme will reward participants with €150 a cow in the first 10 cows and €120 thereafter. And that compares to €90 in the outgoing BDGP and €80 thereafter. We will also seek, where it is financially possible, of course, to support the sector through further exchequer funding on a year-to-year basis. And overall, this government's track record has been one of support for the sector and will continue to be so. For example, along with the Taoiseach, a fortnight ago, on Ministers of State Hackett and Hayden, I launched the €1.5 billion flagship agri-environmental scheme, ACRES, which will be the successor to the GLASS scheme. This scheme it aims to deliver significant long-term environmental improvement through adopting a targeted approach to making strong environmental improvements on farms. ACRES will contribute significantly to achieving improved biodiversity, climate, air and water quality outcomes. Crucially, it will deliver an important income support to some 50,000 farmers. Beef and suckler farmers are well placed, thankfully, to benefit from ACRES because of the high nature aspects of many of your farms and your strong record of being environmentalists. I'm also putting €256 million into the new CAP to continue the development and growth of the organic sector. This is a five-fold increase in funding for the sector compared to the outgoing CAP period. I know organics won't be for everyone, but I think if people examine it closely, it is something to get excited about. From higher support payments to a reduction in fertiliser spreading, this can be a win-win for farmers and for the environment. In terms of supports for the sector additional to the Common Agricultural Policy, in 2021 we paid just over €75 million in direct supports to the suckler and beef sector through the Rural Development Programme and national schemes. This level of support clearly demonstrates the government's understanding of the importance of the sector to the economic, environmental and social sustainability of rural Ireland. Also, to help support all farmers to deal with the fallout of the illegal and atrocious war in Ukraine, I've pledged an additional €91 million to farm families in the form of €10 million for the tillage incentive scheme for farmers to plant cereal crops and grassland so as to increase the availability of family or of animal feed over the coming winter. We expect up to 25,000 additional hectares of tillage crops, which will increase supply of animal feed. I've also put in place a €2 million multi-species sward scheme, which has been almost fully subscribed. And finally, of course, there is this €56 million fodder support scheme. The aim of this scheme is to incentivise dry stock farmers to grow and save more hay and silage with a payment of €100 per hectare with up to €1,000 per family farm for hay and silage saved by the 5th of September. And the scheme, of course, is now open for applications, and I would encourage all of you, if you haven't applied, to do that. Facing into a scenario where we have to feed a growing global population over the years ahead, projected to reach 10 billion people by 2050, we need a world-class beef sector more than ever in the time ahead. No one has come up to me, I have to say, since I've become privileged to fulfil the role of Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine, to say, look, listen, we should look to produce less food in this country. Not one person has said that. And of course, it's not a notion that I would entertain either, because we truly have a world-class beef sector here, and what you do and the production that you're responsible for is done in a sustainable, safe and traceable system, which ensures that our food has a worldwide strong reputation. But of course, we do have to make our contribution along with all other sectors of the economy to reducing emissions in the years ahead. The Climate Action Plan is setting out a target of 22 to 30% reduction in agricultural greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2030, and that's a negotiation and engagement that we're involved in at the moment in relation to finalising a sectoral target. But there's no doubt that the target we have will be one which will be ambitious, but it's important that it's one that's proportionate for the sector. So that would mean that for agriculture, emissions would need to reduce to between 16 and 18 metric tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030 from a baseline of 23 megatons in 2018, which would be an absolute reduction of between 5 and 7 metric tonnes. When it comes to climate, my position has been clear from the outset, which is in terms of the final emission ceiling that is set for the sector, it must be one that allows our farmers to continue to produce the world-class food that is demanded over the world. The Climate Action Plan identifies a series of actions that can deliver emissions reductions within the context of a stable herd. And there are known or existing measures which will get the sector close to the target range for the agriculture sector based on maintaining animal numbers. There is a real opportunity to maximise emissions reductions through early adoption of such measures. The overly simplistic narrative of just cutting beef numbers to solve one problem won't work, and it will create further problems. The reality is that we have a complex situation to manage emissions within the sector, and this will require a range of measures, new management practices, as well as adopting emerging technologies. One of the biggest opportunities for beef farmers in terms of climate action is the issue of earlier finishing times for prime beef cattle. By moving from an average kill-out age at the moment of 27 months back to 24 months, we can abate up to 1 megaton CO2 equivalent in emissions. that's going to be incredibly important going forward, and it is something that we'll need to bank if we're going to deliver on our climate targets. Doesn't mean, of course, that all cattle will be finished at 24 months, but it is an example of how moving the slaughter times through good breeding and strategic feeding can reduce our emissions. To help chart a roadway for the sector, I've established the Food Vision 2030 Beef and Sheep Group, which is independently chaired by Professor Thea Hennessy. I've asked that group to examine how we can future-proof the sector and support the long-term viability of our family farms. In the first instance, they will complete a report on how best we reduce emissions from the sector. The group will then move on to examine and progress the other sector-specific actions set out in Food Vision 2030, which was developed by a stakeholder committee using a food systems approach, acknowledging the important linkages between food, the environment, and between food, health, and nutrition. I'm confident that progressing the sectoral actions set out in Food Vision will contribute to the economic, environmental, and social sustainability of beef farming in Ireland in the decade ahead. I want to again thank Liam Herlihy and Director Frank O'Mara for inviting me to be here with all of you. I want to reassure beef and suckler farmers here today of my absolute and continuing commitment to the sector. I need to be clear that the decade ahead will be one of challenge, but with challenge comes opportunity. And I want to ensure that you are able to farm whatever enterprise you want to, and one that suits your lifestyle and farm type now and into the future. Critically, I also want to ensure that your daughters and your sons or your nieces and your nephews have all the opportunities that were afforded to you to start a career in farming. Can we say for certain that the next generation will farm in the same way as we have or you have? No is the answer to that, but that's evolution. And your farm has changed and evolved since you took over, and our farming enterprises will continue to evolve, change, and adapt. But I am clear on this, and that is that we have a strong and vibrant beef sector and will have it long into the future. Animal proteins will continue to be the bedrock of what we do as a world-class producer of food. But we must also ensure that we explore all avenues to protect the incomes of our farmers. The starting point for our beef sector, and indeed the wider agriculture sector as we face into the challenging decade, is a really strong one. We've faced unimaginable challenges in the past, like horse meat, foot and mouth, and BSE, but we endured and we succeeded by being resilient and by being innovative. The beef produced on your farm is the envy of countries across the world. I've eaten Irish beef in markets across the globe, and it is the product that is in demand because of the quality produced on farms here. Earlier this year, as part of a trade mission, I learned that Irish beef is being served in the world's tallest building in Dubai. And that represents its progress and how it continues to grow. Irish beef is very much on top of the world, and there was no fitting location more so than that for such a great product. And that certainly filled me and all of those who visited it with enormous pride. We will continue to be a world-class beef producer, and that will be driven by you, the farmers and family farms of Ireland, and I look forward to working to support you on that journey. So, Goramila Maya Agaf Golair, and thank you, Liam, and thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Minister, and I've absolutely no doubt that those positive comments will hit the Agri websites almost immediately, and you can rest assured, Minister, that your commitment to agriculture is certainly matched by our Director of Teagasc, Professor Frank O'Mara, who is absolutely committed to the beef sector. Brendan Golden, please. Sorry, just Brendan, if you wouldn't mind, if we could just wait. I think it's important for the benefit of everybody if we could have a roving mic, please. Sorry. Hold a second, Brendan.
Okay. Minister, I'm delighted to hear you recognising the importance of the suckler cow to our beef industry, because everybody here knows that our suckler cow is the foundation of our beef industry and the way we market our beef worldwide. Now, the level of funding you announced does leave us falling very short of where we are already, because it's 28 million short of the position we had in the current cap and with our BPS. So it is critically important that you have it within your remit to support our sector to the tune of €300 per cow, and use the funding that's available to you to do so. And also, we have huge challenges going forward, and across our sector, it's important that we have a payment of €100 to support our beef rearing and cattle finishing systems as well, in light of the challenges from climate and environment going forward. We know we have one of the best products worldwide, and we need you to stand behind us full square in that space. So I leave it at that, Minister. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and I know you never miss an opportunity to advocate for the beef sector, and rightly so. So listen, in relation to, and I know, as you know, I toured the country as part of developing the Common Agricultural Policy Plan, which is now, and we're hoping to hopefully have approval at European level in the next number of weeks on, if things progress well. But as part of that, I've laid out the financial envelope for the next cap to bring us up to 2027. And within that, and obviously we fought hard, and the Taoiseach would have fought hard at European level in relation to Pillar 1 funding, in relation to trying to maintain that. There was a proposal on the table that should be reduced. As a country, we were to the forefront in relation to pushing back on that and trying to maintain that. But there's no doubt that when you look at the European budget or the cap budget at European level, over the decades and over the years, it has been decreasing as a proportion of the overall European budget, and also as a proportion as well of its real value to family farms. And that's been a challenge, but it's one that we're to the forefront of trying to push back on. But of course, the part that we do have control over is the national co-funding that we bring to the table in terms of Pillar 2. And working with my colleague, Minister for Public Expenditure, Michael McGrath, I was very glad to be able to bring an additional 50% funding to the table in relation to Pillar 2 this time around, increasing it from what would have been €1.9 billion in the previous cap to €2.9 billion over this period, this 7-year period from what would have been 21 to 27. What that does is that means that all of those schemes which are part of Pillar 2, because of course Pillar 1 is primarily basic payment and the entitlement system, the schemes such as the beef schemes are in Pillar 2. And that enabled me to put significant additional funding into schemes like the environmental scheme, the New Acres scheme, but also really importantly as well to beef up the beef scheme, the beef and suckler scheme that is in Pillar 2. So as I said in my contribution there, the new beef suckler scheme, which will come into play in January of this year, will deliver a payment on the first 10 cows of €150 and on the remainder of 120. And that compares to the outgoing DDGP, which would have delivered €90 on the first 10 and €80 on the remainder. So that is the anchor scheme in the new CAP programme, and it's a much more significant anchor scheme in terms of the payment and the underpinning of the beef sector, and that will kick off from January next year. Of course, alongside that, and as we go from budget to budget, I look to see where we can provide additional support, depending on where the national finances are and how much I can secure for the sector. We have, as a government, and a Minister for Public Expenditure has really stepped up to the mark in terms of supporting me over the last 2 budgets. As you know, in 2021, we secured a 12% increase in the national budget that year for agriculture and food, and that was so that we could continue all of the outgoing schemes that were there in the outgoing cap right throughout the transition period, and indeed do additional schemes such as the REAP scheme, for example, which started in 2020 last year and is running this year, and do those additional measures. Because traditionally, when you're going from one cap programme to the next, you have gap years in terms of schemes. And what that means is gaps in farmers' income where they don't have that income for the year. So we've managed to maintain that. So budget from budget now on, I will try, and anywhere I can, as I have done during my time as Minister, seek to improve in that. This year, in terms of the additional funding we brought to the table, assessing how best we could spend it, and again with the support of Minister McGrath, secured that €56 million fodder support scheme. And the reason I put it into that, in terms of the national funding, was to try and ensure that we have a sector and an agri-food sector and a farming sector that's as resilient as possible by encouraging and incentivising everyone to grow as much fodder over the course of this year as possible to put ourselves in a good position for the winter and spring coming, given the challenges we're going to have internationally, given the challenges there in relation to increased grain prices, indeed lack of certainty around supply for grain, unlike what we would have had in previous years, and also to protect and move early to ensure we don't have the situation which we had 3 times in the last decade, which was a fodder crisis, where going back to just 2018, we were importing grass fodder from outside this country. And that won't be something we'll be in a position to do this year, because it's not very likely to be available. If we don't grow it at home, we're unlikely to be able to find it abroad, and that's not a situation we want to be in. Okay. Thank you.
Just maybe to put a structure on the questions, because, you know, I said 2 or 3, but I can see several hands up. Flor, Derek, the gentleman at the back, you, and know the fact that there's a younger person here. It's important that we leave the last question to the younger person to ask the question. Flor, please.
Yeah, well, I was having attended both the Sheep Open Day and Attendees on Saturday week, and here today it's quite plain that the suckler cow or the ewe cannot survive without support, or won't survive. I've been involved in sucklers and sheep all my life, and what I know is since 00, the supports have been withdrawn from the sucklers. I think it was a major mistake that we didn't go for coupling in Pillar 1. And I will acknowledge what you said, Minister, and agree wholeheartedly with you. Anybody that can make the change at the moment from suckling or sheep into dairying has made that move. And the people that are left in the suckling and the sheep game are left there because of land type and location. And we need, you know, we cannot survive without support. And in fairness to Teagasc, they have put the figures out there, and it's quite clearly that we can't do it without serious supports. And with the last 22 years, the supports are moving away from the men that actually own the cow and the ewe, and that's been proven. We're losing between 600 and 1,000 cows a week at the moment, and nobody seems to be taking any notice of it. It's a major loss. We're heading towards from a suckler had 1.1 million down to 600,000. And you know, I mean, these are also sole traders. They're pumping, that didn't being acknowledged. These are not companies. These are individuals paying tax in good times into the economies in the peripheral areas of our own county, Donegal, West Cork and Kerry. You know, I mean, by our very nature, we are farming in areas where there's very little other economic activity. And I think, you know, I mean, the government will have to do more to support them. Thanks, Minister.
Thanks. And by the way, if you don't mind, in the interest of time, I will take 2 together. If you wouldn't mind, please, Derek, as well.
Okay, thanks, Minister. I would recognise certainly what you have said in your presentation, but I think you have to realise that the current proposals on CAP will see a massive reduction in direct supports to the full-time dry stock farmers across the country. They are not going to be made up by other payments that you've suggested. The second thing is they're not going to be addressed by the acre scheme, as it seems to be targeted more to much lowerly stocked farmers. So in effect, what we're looking at is the dry stock sector, particularly the commercial side of it, being written off. And it seems to be a policy of the department which would concern me seriously. Since 2012, we've seen the suckler herd reduced by more than 30%. The dairy herd has increased by 60%. The number of dairy farmers has also reduced in that period. We tend to be driving towards a factory-type scenario on the dairy side and a very extensive side on the suckler side. And that's not viable going forward in rural areas. And I would just finally like to say, Minister, that you have to realise that without direct support to a sector, family farms across the country, without a serious level of direct support, and part of it could have came from Pillar 1, that decision apparently has been made. Without it will not survive, and we will stay reducing our herd by 500 or 600 cows a week. It's happening all over the country. They're the animals that produce the best quality that we try and market, but more importantly, if we look at climate change, they're by far the most carbon efficient, and we seem to be squeezing them out for some other agenda that I think has to be halted and has to be called. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Derek.
Yeah, thanks, Derek, and thanks, Flor. So, absolutely, Flor, first of all, in relation to the sheep and suckler sector, it's really important we provide the support for them. That's why we increased, and touching on Derek's point afterwards or later about the overall CAP funding. Obviously, we have only a certain level of control over the funding that comes in Pillar 1 because it's a European competency and it has to get agreement across all countries. But we have a hell of a lot of control over what we deliver in terms of the co-financing in Pillar 2. And that's where we as a government have stepped up and increased that by 50%, a level of increase that had never been seen before in relation to Pillar 2. And that's so that we can do more on all of those schemes. So all of the schemes that were there in the outgoing cap have all been taken forward, developed and strengthened. If we look at the suckler scheme, I've described how the anchor scheme there for sucklers will be paying 150 in the first 10 compared to 90 on the first 10 cows previously. If we look back to the 2016 cap, when that was first published and profiled, there wasn't any sheep scheme in that. There is, in this scheme now, or in this cap running from 23 to 27, an anchor scheme there in terms of the sheep welfare scheme. That's being increased from €10 to €12. I know it's a small increase, and certainly sheep farmers would have liked to do more. But even whenever you're getting a 50% increase in your overall budget, you still have to make choices. And this cap, the starting point, is a sheep scheme plugged in there with a €12 per ewe payment. And as that scheme would have evolved at the end of the last cap, that's the starting point now in this cap, that scheme is there. And where it's possible to seek to strengthen that as we go along, certainly that would be a key. Sheep is a very key priority for me, and we'll do our best in that regard to support the sector. To speak into Derek's point, second of all, listen, there's absolutely no agenda whatsoever, Derek, to try and make farming any less viable for any farmer. The whole objective of what I was doing, and in terms of putting together a cap plan which I feel was balanced and which I discussed up and down the country and in March right across the country, was trying to reach a balance which actually supported farmers in the best way possible. As you know, particularly in Pillar 1, where you're dealing with a defined pot, whatever way that is carved up and distributed, it's going to have people who are more happy or less happy. You can't please everyone with a defined pot. All you can do is try and be as fair and proportionate as you can be. One of the 2 or 3 of the key steps I took in relation to that was, first of all, the maximum payment in the outgoing cap was 150,000. I brought that down to 60,000 to try and ensure that it was as fair a cap as possible, and also then brought in front loading on the first 30 hectares. So for your average size farm, there was an additional €40 per hectare payment on the first 30 hectares up to your average farm size. And then in relation to convergence, the requirement in every member state was to do at least 85% convergence. You could go to 100%. The vast majority of European member states have gone to 100%, but I held that at what was the minimum, because understanding again that that was something that was going to have an impact on farms, and was a reasonable balance. Where we had control and capacity to influence the funding, which was Pillar 2, we did our maximum we could to try and profile that, and that's where the extra €1 billion, the 50% increase in funding comes from. In relation to the acre scheme, I wouldn't agree with you. I think that is something that there's measures in there which is options for all farmers, and I would urge all farmers to look at what measures in there could work for them, and can enable them to contribute to the biodiversity, reversing the biodiversity decline that the last number of decades have seen, and indeed contribute to reducing emissions, and really importantly, derive an income stream from that. I think there is options in there which everyone, which would suit all types of farmers. Thanks.
Thanks, Minister. The gentleman there, and you can give your name, please, if you don't mind.
It's about the sustainable farming, and Tia Hennessy going to look after that. Now, their farms, and they're in very poor shape. They're in the 18th century. No facilities of any kind broke down. Now, they're sustainable. They keep them going, but they're really burning themselves out. Is there any way that Tia Hennessy can look into that? Because it's very important. There's no safety on the farms. There's no, it's a deadly area. Now, the people that's left out are the aged ones. And there's a sustainable farm, provided they're given the funds that's there. Now, the funds aren't big enough, because the 60% for a young fella, a 40 that could run a marathon every day, and then an old fella, they can only run 100 yards every day, he gets 40% grant. Can you change that, Minister? Because a predecessor of yours was able to give 70% to Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan in the slurry. They're back in the in the early 20s, right? And everyone else got 60% grant. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Paul, you can bring down to Deborah Keller, please, and we'll take two together, please. And then we're down to the last speaker.
Thanks very much, Paul. Just to say, Deborah Keller, National President, Irish Cattle and Sheep Farmers. I suppose the first thing is to say, to thank Frank Mamara and the Teagasc group for this thing here today. And they did a lot of information on the beef and suckler cows and things, but to be honest about it, it's very, very sad to go into a ring now and see a farmer selling super weanlings, and you know that the mothers are going in the ring next door, or they're going to tomorrow. And like it is happening, the suckler herders for falling, there's cows being slaughtered. And unless there is something done very soon, the suckler herd is going to disappear. But the problem is that there's a lot of farmers, especially the western half of this country, who cannot do anything else besides sucking, depending on the land type, fragmented land and so on. And I know according to the Teagasc figures, the dairy farmers are 10 times better off. But if there's nothing you can do, only stays for sucking, that's all you can do. And I think it's a shame that the suckler herd is falling. But like, things are good this year, prices are good, but the costs have the whole thing ruined again, like, do you know what I mean? And I think the minister, if you do no more, all the there's a lot of thousands of suckler farmers, smaller suckler farmers, who are not in board beer. They have no reason to go to a factory. All their selling is done in the mart. I know they're being kicked into board beer, but as I was saying to you, the sustainable survey can actually be done on the line. It can be done by your consultant or done by your planner. You don't have to join board beer to do the sustainability survey. And I think it's a shame where things are bad enough, but putting fellas into board beer, more expense, more bureaucracy that fellas don't need. Thanks very much, and I'm very glad to be here today.
Thanks, Dermot. Minister.
Yeah, thanks. So just first of all, in relation to the question around TAMS and on-farm investment. So as we know, there's been an increase in farmyards across the country now bear no resemblance to 30 years ago.
Hold on.
Yeah,
okay.
well, listen, I mean, while you'll have exceptions to the rule, I certainly know, and I remember what it was like when I was a kid growing up on a farm, and the facilities that were on farms in general in the neighbourhood, and how that has transformed over the last 20, 30 years. It bears no resemblance whatsoever in terms of the sheds, in terms of the silage facilities, etc., in terms of the farmyards. Thankfully, it's in a totally different world of where it would have been then. Central to that has been the farm supports over those years, which have continued and which are fully continuing at the moment, and which will be continued and are programmed in there to the next cap as well, and which are really important in terms of supporting those who are farming to continue to grow and to improve. But also an important aspect of that as well is providing additional support to young farmers, and that's why the 60% is there, and also for the first time ever additional support as well to women farmers. So there's going to be 60% grant funding under TAMS for female farmers for the first time, in recognition of the fact that we need to change the culture on Irish farms, where in the past it wasn't seen as desirable for the daughter to become a farmer as it was for the son. And that's something we need to change, and thankfully is changing. When I go to farm meetings across the country now, it's wonderful to see. When I go to UCD and the Ag Science courses, it's wonderful to see how there's as many women as there is men now studying, and that's something we need to see, and certainly across the food industry that's very much the case. We haven't seen it come through yet within the farm gate as much, and that's something that we want to, from a policy point of view, really push and change to. So there will be increased funding for on-farm investment in this cap coming forward to continue that journey towards modernisation, which thankfully we have come a massive way. It's a transformed world in that regard. In relation to the second point, Dermot, so listen, in relation to Board Bia, and obviously I've made a change in relation to the new beef suckler scheme, in that a requirement of taking part in the new scheme is that you apply and join Board Bia Origin Green and Quality Assurance. And that's part of a journey which is important for the sector as well. It's not a decision I took lightly. As I say, I was increasing significantly the funding in that anchor scheme. So where BDGP paid €90 and €80, this scheme will pay €150 and €120 on cows. That's a big, big increase. It's a significant backing of the sector. And in increasing the funding that's going in there, I felt it was a proportionate step to take to make it a requirement to actually join board BEA. Not to make it more difficult or more challenging for any farmer, okay, but to actually strengthen the position of our beef sector as a whole and to strengthen the value of our sector too. So when we're selling, so that when the animal leaves your farm or any other farm, and this is the case for 90% of the animals that leave all of our farms, they go abroad into international markets where we then as a country look to try and maximize the value of them and ensure that we get the best price. That's the work that's done at farm gate level in terms of the quality of the product, but then we have to market that. And key to that, and increasingly so, is in relation to what customers across the world are looking for. And we know now that it's not just, and we've seen this in recent years, how people are so attentive now to what they eat, unlike much more so than they would have been in the past. But they're also increasingly, year by year, by month, much more attentive as well to how what they eat is produced, not just that it's safe and nutritious, but also that it's done in a way that is environmentally sustainable and where that can be verified. And that Origin Green Quality Assurance branding, where we were celebrated as 10 years in existence there last week, actually, I attended an event I attended. That is crucial in relation to us being able to sell Irish beef and get ahead of other countries which are competing with us for those markets. And therefore, the more farmers we have in the scheme, the stronger our sector is overall. I know the particular challenge that's there for beef sucklers in particular is, listen, if I'm selling it to the factory, I can see the QA bonus at the end of it. If I'm selling it in the ring as a suckler, I don't necessarily see that. If we can come up with ideas in terms of how that's monetized and that's improved, yes, by all means, let's look at that. But there is no doubt, while it might not necessarily be directly visible, it strengthens the overall product and the overall sellability and value of our beef if we have Origin Green and quality assurance as part of it. And that's why in increasing that fund to the beef scheme, I made that step of trying to strengthen our sector overall, because it'll be to the benefit of everyone, suckler farmers included.
Okay, thanks. This gentleman here, and you can give her name, please.
Breffney O'Brien.
And sorry, and then we will finish off. Edmund, you've promised me that it's going to be very short. I will give you that opportunity.
Yeah. Breffney O'Brien, Agriland. Thank you, Liam. Thank you, Minister. Just on the sectoral emissions reductions targets, Minister, when can we expect a figure, and will it be, are we expecting it to be close to 22 or at that 22%?
Sorry, hold on a second, Minister. Edmund, please. Sorry, just 1 second. Hold a second for the mic.
Thank you very much.
And by the way, thanks, Breffney, for keeping it short.
Yeah, Minister, just on the Food Ombudsman's office, when is it going to be up and running? What powers, very important the powers they have, and I mean, I believe that it should be with somebody with a really strong forensic analysis or forensic accounting analysis. It can't be just a retired civil servant. It has to be somebody that really can get into it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, first of all, to Breffney. So the government is working to try and have it completed by the end of this month, if possible. And ideally, that would like to be the case. Of course, the government commitment is 51% across all sectors, across the economy by 2030. There's different ranges at the moment, has been handed out to different sectors after significant negotiation. Agriculture is by far the lowest of that range at 22 to 30. My objective, and in terms of the engagement I had in getting the ranges in the first instance, and in terms of negotiating now around the sectoral target, is to achieve a target which continues to back farmers across the country to be as productive as we are in relation to producing food, because we need that food. We produce it really well, we produce it really efficiently from a carbon point of view, and it's something that's going to be needed more than ever as the population across the world increases in the years ahead. So we should continue producing that food, but we should also, in every way we possibly can, seek to strive to minimize the emissions footprint of how that food's produced. And in terms of the engagement I'm having across the government with cabinet colleagues, that's the threshold and that's the approach that I'm taking to try and strike that balance. And that's as much as I'll say in relation to where it's going to, obviously it'll reach a conclusion, but that has been and will continue to be the approach that I take in relation to the negotiations around that. And listen to Edmund then in relation to the Food Ombudsman. So it's currently, the bill is published, has gone into the Dáil. It's now with the Agriculture Committee. I attended it last week for a very long session in relation to pre-legislative scrutiny, going through it line by line and head by head. So once they've concluded that work, which I hope they'll have done by the Dáil recess, they've organised a number of meetings in relation to it. Then I'll bring it into the Dáil and Shannon in the autumn. And we've also commenced now the recruitment engagement in terms of getting the approvals for commencing and employing the key staff. And the key to the success of that will be recruiting somebody who can lead out on that. Because while there will be powers there, while there'll be the capacity to fine, to take court enforcements, a key part of it is actually going to have to be proactivity as well. Engaging and making yourself felt across the food supply chain in a way that actually tries to ensure that there's respect between the primary producer and ultimately where it's sold. And trying to as well ensure that there's protocols in place and codes of respect in place in relation to how that engagement takes place. As I say, 90% of our food is sold abroad, so international markets, international prices determine what that price is. We can't influence that from here, but what we want to do is ensure that there's line of sight and transparency in relation to the price that is being got on international markets and how that's traced back to the farm gate, and ensuring that every effort possible and every pressure possible is put on to ensure that farm families are getting a fair price and a fair deal as part of that.
Minister, on behalf of all of us, we really appreciate your attendance, your clarification in relation to your commitment to beef here today, and I think that is something that is very much appreciated by all, and the manner in which you have dealt with the Q&A on behalf of all of the stakeholders and indeed on behalf of all of the farming organisations. Minister, much appreciated and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liam.
I now have the very easy part, is just to step off the stage. We'll be having an open discussion, and my job is to hand over to our moderator, who needs absolutely no introduction, Ivan Yates. Ivan, please.
Thank you, Liam, very much. Just to say there's loads of seats up here. I want to introduce our panel because we're running a bit behind time. Alice, maybe come up. Phelim. Where did Phelim go? Right. So what we've put together now is a world-class forum because there are enormous challenges facing the beef sector. And Michael, come on up. And what we put together is an eclectic group of people who, unlike the last panel, and I had to smile to myself with Michael Berkery sitting there, it brought me back 25 years. When they were answering the questions, folks, they had to be populist. When I was minister, there was an element of telling people what they wanted to hear, both in tone and emotion and so on. I'm now in a completely different space insofar as I am a facilitator and moderator of this panel, and maybe this is more about telling you what you need to know rather than what you want to hear. Because I have to say, for 30, 40 years I've been at Teagasc events, and without doubt this has been, I was here since 9:30, I went around to every stand. It has been the best, most user-friendly, whether it's soil, whether it's genetics, whether it's feed additives, whether it's grass management, whether it's the particular programs, Grass 10, Future Beef, or Dairy Beef 500, absolutely, really so much for you to take away, and I want to pay tribute to all of your people, Frank, in what you put together. So, as you know, an environmental challenge, political challenge, consumer challenge against red meat. Let me go through our panel. Nearest to us is the guy who you'll be have most affinity with. Michael Biggins comes from South Mayo, and he is a frontline farmer, I think 65 suckler cows with his son Niall and his wife Bridie. He is chairman of the IFA Rural Development Committee, but he is your classic suckler farmer selling weanlings and yearlings every year, and has participated, I think, in every rep scheme, an incarnation of rep scheme, so he eats and breathes this. A lady I've known for many years, and someone who combines being a scientist and being a clinician. She is one of the international global experts that we're delighted to have here in Ireland. Professor Alice Stanton works with the RCSI, which you know is a big medical university, and with Beaumont Hospital. And when in the Lancet, A study was produced by a group of scientists called the Global Disease Burden, or Global Burden of Disease, GBD. She has been at the forefront saying that red meat won't cause you cancer, won't cause 900,000 deaths, and isn't impactful on your health in a very scientific way. So she meets the sweet spot of food science, public health, and the food industry, because her husband owns, amongst other things, Devonish Nutrition. Frank O'Mara needs no introduction. Professor Frank O'Mara, for many years, was Director of Research in Teagasc, and since last October is the National Director. And I think all the different schemes, you can see how they're bringing through all the scientific, trial-related evidence right through to the family farm, and I think his leadership is very evident of that. Frank has been on many international committees, the Paris Agreement, IPCC, and many other state bodies. You heard about the sectoral emissions targets. He is directly involved in advising government in all of this, and is in a pivotal role vis-à-vis the Department and Government generally. And last but not least, Phelim O'Neill, a warrior I know. He's a Nordy, he's from Tyrone and Omagh, and you know people. I used to say back in the day when I was in the beef industry, a lot of them were gypsies in suits, the beef processors. Of course, you're not allowed to say that sort of thing anymore. But Phelim worked in Omagh Meats. He worked in the Livestock Commission. He worked representing Northern Ireland Exporters Association. But also, and I know him latterly as this, he is one of the best market analysts. So be it Brexit, be it cap reform, be it what's happening with New Zealand beef, he is the Irish Farmers Journal go-to man since 2015. So what I'm going to do, first of all, and I'm conscious of time, and I'll certainly have you out in less than an hour because I know you've got to travel home, is ask each of the panel maybe, if I'd ask them no question, what did they come here to say that would be of value to you attending today's open day? And I'm going to start with you, Frank. This is your gig. In terms of, the three different future beef, grass 10 and dairy beef 500, what are the messages that you're trying to put across in an environment where prices have been relatively good, but we have uncertainty with prices, but also we have this carbon target, whatever way you cut it, 22% or 30%, the difficulty is that if you did everything that Teagasc said, according to the KPMG report for the Farmers Journal, that gets you about halfway there. So maybe you could chart for us the course for the future of the beef sector, and remember, after 2030, we're into zero carbon, how you think this sector will deal with that challenge.
Thanks, Ivan, and thanks for an easy opener. So, look, the first thing I'd like to do is thank all of you that have come here today to Beef 2022, and obviously to thank all the staff of Teagasc who have put on this show here today. I think it has been a fantastic event in terms of outlining the technologies that are important for sustainable beef production. And that's what we set out to do today, was to illustrate and demonstrate the technologies that can improve all dimensions of sustainability in your farm business. And obviously, we're absolutely realistic. The aspect of sustainability that means the most to you is your financial sustainability, and that has to come first and foremost. But the environmental sustainability is obviously ratcheting up in importance over the last number of years, and in particular in that, I suppose, climate change. And I suppose the overall message that we wanted to get across to people is that, by doing the things that you would be doing to do good farming, in other words, starting with the soils and getting good soils or healthy soils, and that will get you healthy forages or healthy crops. That moves on to your healthy or animals, your good quality food that Alice will talk about, and to healthy profits. That's also good for the environment. So nearly all the technologies that we talk about for years, like good animal breeding, good animal feeding, good grassland management, good soil health, they are all important for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But we are moving into a new, regime with regard to climate targets here in Ireland. I just, last night in preparation for this, I looked back at the 2019 climate plan, the Climate Action Plan, and in that plan there was a target that agricultural emissions would reduce by between 10 and 15%. And within 2 years that plan was rewritten late last year with a target of between 22 and 30%. So, quite a big step up. But the other big change that has happened in that 2 years is that the targets now are written into national legislation. So the 2019 target was an aspirational target, I suppose, a policy objective. But now we have legislation, and the man that was speaking to us a few minutes ago, the Minister, will have to go into the Dáil every year and account for progress towards that target. So that is a new, I suppose, reality really for us. And I suppose what we all have to realise is that we can't ignore these targets. And look, it wouldn't be the right thing to do to ignore them, because climate change is a big issue. Like, it is the biggest issue facing the world, and we have to deal with it. And there's no point saying, well, we're great, so we don't have to do anything at all. Everybody in the world, the good countries, the bad countries, are going to have to put their shoulder to the wheel. So it's the right thing to do. It's the regulatory thing to do. But also, if we want to be a world-class beef industry and we want to be selling our product into the best markets in the world, well, there's a great opportunity now, I think, to kind of get a head start. Like, if we can show and demonstrate to our consumers that we actually are taking this issue seriously, that we've done something about it, that we've made progress, you know, we've the opportunity to be one of the first countries in the world, if not the first, to be able to make those kind of claims. So there's a regulatory driver here, there's the right thing to do, and there's an opportunity for us. So I would say for those three reasons.
My question was, can we meet those targets without curbing the national breeding herd, be it suckler or dairy?
Yeah, and that's a tough question. And if I was to stand here today with the technologies that we have available to us, I'd say, you know, well, depending on where the target lands, but even at 22%, we would struggle to get to 22% reduction with the technologies that we know we can use today. But that then ignores, I suppose, human ingenuity, and it ignores science and innovation, which is working really hard to develop new ways to reduce our emissions. And that's, I suppose, a lot of that work was on display at some of the stands today. That's work around things like feed additives. It's work around properly assessing maybe what our animals are emitting at grass, and what has been the contribution of animal breeding to the lower figures that we are measuring today. So there's more progress that can be made than we are able to do today, and that's the key role that Teagasc has, is to make sure that those technologies are developed over the next decade, and that we support you as farmers in terms of using those technologies.
And I understand that, but let's say it comes up short or the target is even greater. Some people who are looking at Ireland Inc. are saying 840,000 suckler cows, 1.6 million dairy cows. Now you've actually, and with sex semen, you know, beyond the heifer replacements, you could have breeding genetics of beef breeds to the dairy sector. And therefore, we have, I think, processing capacity of 1.2 million litres of milk, which is underutilised. The national interest says, in terms of productivity, a cow just producing a calf as opposed to a lactation yield as well, and the added value of butter and cheese, it's a no-brainer what we need to do.
Look, I think that's too simplistic a way of looking at it, and I think the idea of it's one or the other is again not the right way to look at it. Like, for our dairy herd, and you talked about things like sex semen and you know, maybe even going further and using embryo transfer of beef embryos into dairy cows once you've got your replacement. That's really important, because we do need to improve the quality of the beef coming from the dairy herd. But we have a suckler herd, over 800,000 cows, a huge national resource, 70,000 farmers involved in owning that herd, so it's actually 70,000 individual herds. It's in every parish in the country, and that's not to be written off. It is a producer of very high quality product. In some areas it produces it where really there's not many other opportunities to produce, you know, because of land quality. Also, you've got to look at the demographics. The people that are involved in that, you know, a lot of them are you know, in their 60s or even older. They're not going to be switching into dairy. And so, you know, we have to work with the resources we have. That resource is there. I think it's a very valuable national resource, and we have to work to improve the emissions from that, but it also improve its survival and its prosperity.
Before moving on, the other question I want to ask is the measurement of CO2, methane, and N2o. Say if a farmer here wants to find out their own carbon footprint. We've heard about the demonstration farms, the signpost farms. What can Teagasc offer the individual farmer who wants to improve and measure and improve their own carbon footprint? What are you offering?
So we can do that. Obviously, we do that on the demonstration farms. We do it in a very in-depth way on those farms with a huge amount of recording of inputs and outputs and soil sampling and so on. And we want to actually take that to the situation that we can roll that out to tens of thousands of farmers. And we're in the process of developing a methodology or a system to do that. And we would hope to begin next year to enrolling farmers, that wish to do that, to give them a very accurate assessment of what their carbon footprint is. And why are we doing that? Because as an advisory organisation, if we want to go out and work with the farmer to show him or her how to reduce their emissions, well, you absolutely need to be able to tell them where they're starting from. So we then want to be able to do the what-ifs with that. What if I did this, or what if I did that? Where would that get me to? So we want to be able to build that kind of a package that our advisors can use with we have 40,000 clients, and we want to work with those and indeed with other farmers that aren't clients to help them go on that journey.
Okay, side by side with this environmental and economic debate, Alice Stanton, has been this health debate, whereby there's been a war on red meat, that it's hazardous to your health. What is the factual situation about, we know it's a source of protein, this red meat, beef in our diet?
Okay, yeah, no, there's been a challenge, probably numerous, sorry, is it on? Yeah. There's been numerous publications in the medical and scientific literature, particularly in the last 3 years, which have been saying that red meat eating needs to be dramatically reduced, if not totally excluded from the human diet for the benefit of human health. The Lancet journal has probably been the leading publisher of these articles, and there was a particularly influential article published in 2020 called The Global Burden of Disease 2019 Analysis. And it increased the number of deaths attributed to red meat eating from about 25,000 annually worldwide to almost 900,000. So an increase of 36-fold without providing any evidence whatsoever. No published evidence. They just said from the first mouthful of red meat eating, not only was it causing colon cancer, it was causing diabetes, heart attacks, strokes, and breast cancer from the first mouthful per week. So a group of us challenged that. We wrote a letter to the Lancet and said, where's the evidence? And this is not an agreement with what's published in the medical literature. It took us 9 months to get our letter published. We were blocked in multiple ways. Eventually, some investigative journalists expressed interest, asked questions of the Lancet, and our article was published. The Global Burden of Disease collaborators initially were not going to answer our questions. Then they were, and then they weren't again. Eventually, 3 weeks after our article was published, they did publish a letter of response where they admitted, actually, we got it wrong, actually. Red meat doesn't cause hemorrhagic stroke, which is the worst type of stroke. It actually protects from hemorrhagic stroke. They said, actually, the optimal amount of red meat to be eaten is not 0, it's more than that, and we'll have to redo all our calculations, and we'll get it right next time in a couple of years' time. That's not good enough, because the data from the Global Burden of Disease collaborators are used by the UN, by the WHO, by the EU. Farm to Fork used the 2017 data. The National Food Strategy in the UK used the 2017 data, or used the 2019 data, said red meat eating actually was worse than salt eating. So we are still involved in a discussion with the Lancet. We've said, okay, it is unacceptable according to your own guidelines, unacceptable according to international medical publishing guidelines for admitted confirmed errors not to be corrected immediately. And also, it is absolutely against those guidelines to be giving estimates without evidence.
So beyond the Lancet, what is the information? Is there a certain amount of kilograms per year that is good, part of a balanced diet? Is there any difference between grass-fed beef and beef fed on concentrates? And is there a difference between processed meat and a steak?
Okay, the best evidence that you can get from the literature says that if you eat red meat in a moderate helping, which would be about 120 grams portion size, 2 to 4 times a week, that is very helpful in protecting against nutritional deficiencies of protein, of vitamin B12, of iron, of zinc, and also loads of unmeasured chemicals. More than that, there is a small uncertain relationship with heart attacks, strokes, and cancer. And we don't know if that's coming from the red meat directly or whether it's coming from eating excessive calories or an unbalanced diet. But it really doesn't matter actually, because we're not advising eating red meat more than 4 times a week anyway. So up to that level, it's good for you. Very little evidence, and if there is a difference between grass-fed and concentrate-fed beef, it'll be very small in terms of human health. However, it might be very big in terms of sustainability. Processed meats, well, in fact, we're all eating far too much processed and particularly ultra-processed foods. So there is more evidence, again, of health disadvantages for processed meat, but it's still very small and it's actually uncertain. I would be in agreement with...
White meat?
Pardon?
Red meat versus white meat?
Nothing against white meat, other than if you eat too much of anything, it's not good for you.
All right. Going to flip to economic sustainability. Phelim O'Neill. So, a couple of quick questions for you. Beef hit €5 a kilogram. It's coming back a bit. In the sense of, say, half our beef goes to the UK. Post-Brexit, we heard a lot of apocalyptic kind of warnings and so on. How has Brexit worked out, and how do you think it will work out? And then there's a number of current international trade deals, Mercosur, access into the EU market, Australia, New Zealand beef. What are the dynamics of the market, and what do you think the outlook is?
Thanks, Ivan. Look, this is, I suppose, a question at 2 levels. There's a here and now. What's the picture going to be for the people in this tent today that's going to be finishing cattle next winter and selling next spring, where they're working off a cost base that in 2022 is mushroomed compared to what it had been last year. So that's where we look at maybe the here and now price that we passed €4 a kilo earlier this year. We passed €5, and that's essentially the minimum where we need to be, because again, if I refer back to the Teagasc figures from just a few weeks ago there, we can see that in terms of finishing and in terms of where farmers are, when you do and I appreciate that maybe there's nothing worse in life than averages because it masks such a different spread of performance, but the reality is that it is a very marginal business at Farmgate, and essentially what we need to be doing is holding the costs or reducing the costs and trying to hold the selling price. Now, how that's achievable is the $6 million question. When we export 90% of the product that we produce, virtually half of it to the UK. And you asked the question about Brexit, and the reality, the frank reality is, up until this moment in time and for the immediate future, Brexit has absolutely zero impact on the Irish beef industry. Now, will that continue? It's unlikely. First and foremost, the UK has deferred the introduction of all their border control checks, which brings the administration cost and the delays, etc., which brings an extra charge, if you like, on doing business. The processing sector picks that up, but is still there as a cost, and every cost and every step of the chain ultimately is paid from the beef carcass. The longer term thing, and the bit that I have been most concerned about, and just in the week that the European Union has concluded a free trade deal with New Zealand, which will give access for an extra 10,000 tonne of New Zealand beef at a very preferential, favourable 7.5% tariff. That means that more New Zealand beef will come into the European Union, and that's further competition for Irish farmers. But that's not the biggest deal. For me, the biggest deal is the fact that the UK were straight out of the blocks to do a trade deal with Australia, with New Zealand, that essentially throws that market open to Australian and New Zealand beef. Now, Australia is the top lamb exporter in the world. They're the number 3 beef exporter. New Zealand's the second biggest lamb exporter, and they're about 6th, 7th or 8th in terms of beef exporters. They will have full access, they will have as much access in time to the UK market as Irish exports. And that is when we will feel that challenge. And it is going to be a bit like boiling the frog in the saucepan, because the reality is that will be phased in over a number of years. It will take 15 years until they have full access, but they will be the competitor for Irish beef, who have 80% of that market at this minute. And that is when we will start to feel it progressively, competition growing there. We still have advantages. By then we might have a grass-fed brand. We also have the fact that we're on their doorstep and we can deliver as quickly as the north of Scotland can, and that's good. But the reality is we will face competition in that space.
And what's the relative price of world price, Australian, New Zealand price?
Just looking at it, I just checked the New Zealand price this week because the trade deal was concluded, and I'm looking at it in this week's Farmers Journal. The reality is beef price today in New Zealand is significantly below €4 a kilo. It's the lowest beef price in a major beef exporting country in the world, and I include Brazil in that. I include all the South American countries, North America, Australia as well. So look, the reality is they will have a very price competitive, high quality product now. Okay, you might say it's mainly a dairy industry product that comes from New Zealand, but given that so much of our beef is now sold in manufacturing, in pies, burgers, etc., that they will still be a very competitive, in a competitive space.
The Minister was asked about CAP reform and so on. What do you think CAP reform's impact on the market will be? Because I think in terms of overall supply and demand is still, there was an FAO report Frank alluded to yesterday, which said that demand was still going to grow.
Yeah, if we look at that report in 2031, the world will be looking for something, I think, on the top of my head, like 4 million tonnes more beef. So look, the beef consumption is growing. It's not growing in the developed world, it's growing in the developing world, where you have the combination of population growth and increasing wealth as well, thankfully, which is a good thing. We have serious poverty in parts of particularly sub-Saharan Africa, but there is also Asian economies are growing quite fast, and that's where the growth and demand will come from. Now, the other side of that coin, of course, is Brazil, and their beef industry published their 10-year report there a few weeks ago. I was looking at it, and lo and behold, and at a time when we looked that we could have to take some numbers out of the equation if this target is set at the wrong place, and we have covered the KPMG, or you covered KPMG in your introductory remarks, but the reality is Brazil is going to expand their cattle processing by 8 million units, 8 million head by 2030. Now, if you think for a moment that Ireland slaughters processes less than 2 million, but 1.8 million this year, they're looking, their increase is looking like 4 times the total Irish killed. So look, it's going to be a very competitive global market space, and you can broaden that discussion out into the rights and the wrongs of climate legislation. EU CAP policy has changed to the point where they want to focus much more so on the environment than foods processing, production and security. That is the reality of life now. Whether it's fair or it's unfair, that is where we are. We've seen, for example, one of the big areas of development, and perhaps the current fertiliser prices will drive this as well, the surge in demand and ambition, if you like, for organic production. Now, that's not going to be market-led from an Irish point of view. If that happens, and it quite possibly could happen, it's an option farmers have to consider, that will be delivered because of incentive, by support, financial support.
That was the other thing I wanted to ask you. On the Teagasc boards, it said 22 over 21, fertiliser prices plus 150%, total costs, fuel, feed, everything, up 36-7%. I saw it varied from one chart to another, nearly 40%. What are you saying, that this is a spike, or will it last as long as the Ukraine war lasts, or do you think that this is a permanent change in the cost structure?
I don't think, Ivan, any of us, and if we even thought we could, we wouldn't sit here. We would be somewhere in the finance capitals of the world studying futures markets. But look, the reality is I think we're faced with a high energy cost for certainly the immediate and medium future. It's not going to come back anytime soon. And I think when we've seen major turbulent events, and I suppose being of a similar vintage to yourself, we have lived through, as young people, the Arab-Israeli war and the oil crisis of the 1970s. We had the 1981 with the Iran-Iraq one, and we have now the latest one because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And what we have seen after that is that there may be some pulling back from the peaks that have been hit, but we have never quite went back to the base that we've been at before. So I think the reality of life is that we may not be facing a fertiliser price that we've had in 2022 going on into the rest of this decade, but I similarly don't think we're going to get the 2019 or 2020 price either. So the reality is we're going to be faced with dearer input costs, even if they're not quite as expensive as they are today. And that means that our commodity prices have to move to reflect those. And if they don't, the hard facts of economic life are that then the economic sustainability part of the debate's lost.
Michael Biggins, you've been very patient. I had to come to someone last. I felt the earlier part of the discussion was very farmer income focused. You've been around today, you've participated in all the schemes, and you're a suckler cow farmer all your life. As we face these challenges, how are you adapting on your farm? You have participated in the signpost schemes with Teagasc. What are the type of things that you're doing to adapt?
Well, Ivan, I've been farming in my own right since the mid-70s, as you can judge by the colour of the head. But, you know, I appreciated that as we were, you know, in the last number of years, things have evolved. I mean, I can remember getting grant aid for reclamation and that, which is an absolute no-no now. And people are frowning at it and that, but I can tell you I reclaimed about 80% of my farm, you know, from grant aid and that. But, you know, I acknowledge that, you know, my son farms with me. It's going to have to evolve and change. We wanted to concentrate on what's happening inside the farm gate as well. And like, I suppose the most important reason for, you know, signing up to the signpost farm thing was, can it improve the farm's profitability? That's number one for every farmer that comes in this place here. It's their own profitability. Frank alluded to there earlier about new technologies coming down the track, and that's all very well. But like the beef industry, there's so little wriggle room in the beef industry. You know, if new technologies mean extra costs, then I think we're going to have to, you know, look at maybe the meat industry stepping up to the plate. They're talking about, you know, feed additives and that for finishing cattle and that. Because the margins are so tight, I think, you know, it's impossible to ask beef farmers to take up all that slack in order for the costs that we're going to incur to incorporate those new technologies. And I think there's going to have to be a serious look at, you know, where.
Okay, but within one of the things that struck me going around was there was a recurring message, which was the farms that were most efficient, were most profitable, were most environmentally sustainable. And it just seemed to me that there was good practice out there, that you can rail against government and EU and the world and the media, but there's quite a lot within your farm that's out there today that you can apply.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look, you can start with genomics, or like nearly every suckler cow in the country has been genomically tested at this stage, which is a massive achievement. We had gone away from soil testing. It's coming back in big time. Sorry. It's coming back in big time. A huge amount of farms are soil tested, liming and all that. You have protected urea, which people are using. You have the use of LESS equipment. Like, this is all technology.
Earlier slaughter dates, earlier calving dates.
And what we have started doing this year since we joined the signpost farm is we've actually gone grass measuring, where you grass measure every week to see what your grass wedge is going forward for the next 2 to 3 weeks. That'll determine whether you're actually going out and putting out that bag of fertilizer or not, and maybe you're not, which is a saving as well. You know, so look, there are technologies there, and those things are, you can incorporate, every farmer can incorporate those into his system. But what I'm saying is, look, going forward, if there's new technologies coming along, because the beef industry is such a tight, it's so tight as regards profitability, there's got to be more buy-in from the meat industry to actually
I wanted to give you an opportunity as a West of Ireland dry stock farmer. So I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. If you were running Irish agriculture on a computer program on a desktop in Kildare Street, you would get rid of the suckler herd and you continue to grow the dairy herd, and you'd have dairy beef produced on all the beef farms. All those weanlings, all those calves would be on dairy farms instead of suckler. How do you react to that?
Well, the Minister alluded to it earlier as regards the comments in the media yesterday, and he said he was annoyed at it, but I can assure you, I think the man that wrote those comments yesterday, I think he made a great point for not having economists run the country, because if you have that, you're going to destroy communities. He's talking about replacing suckler cows. He wasn't talking about just replacing it with dairy stock. He was talking about forestry as well. Nothing against forestry, but in some parts of the country, it has actually destroyed communities. And the suckler cow is so important to rural Ireland. It's absolutely massive to a vibrant community. That it's not just about economists like balancing books. I think it's very much it's to do with the whole fibre of keeping rural Ireland alive, the suckler cow.
Okay, that was a skim through. This is very much your forum. Where's Paul Crossan when I need him? Yeah, okay. So if anyone would like to ask a question, either generally of the panel or to any specific member, or disagree or add to any point that has been raised, that was just to really prompt the debate. The gentleman at the back, put up your, there's a gentleman there as well. Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question? We'll go to that man first there, and then we'll come to you at the back. Okay?
I would just like to agree with you. As I said earlier on to the Minister, the only reason we have sucklers is because of our land type and our location. We'd all begun dairying long ago. I on my own farm would be milking cows if I had all my land is fragmented and the land type in my area. Maybe in hindsight, the plan is to actually eliminate the other suckler farmers around me and make room for us to go into dairying. That's the only way. What's left, what can go to dairying has gone. The rest of us can't. And that's what the question I said to the Minister. We live in locations where we can't change our enterprise, and the money has moved since 0-0 away from us. And that's what I said to the Minister now. I was getting £300 per suckler cow, £30 per ewe in 0-0. Now today, it's a dairy farmer next door to me, nothing against dairying, this is 10 times or 20 times more profitable to me, can draw the same per hectare on premiums as I can. Back then he could get practically zero, whereas I could get big support from the EU. That is what has happened. The money came into this country to be directed at the people that had the poorer type land and were farming fragmented holdings in areas that they could do nothing. And that is the real problem we have. We aren't against any sector. We'd all be milking cows if we could. Thanks.
Is that a feature of market forces, Phelim?
No, it's a feature of EU policy, Ivan, and the evolution of the CAP. And again, Flora, you've been around these discussions for as long as I have, if not longer. And that's something that I suppose as farmers that we have to wrestle with, that we have seen this movement of money, and it has been a case of robbing Peter to pay Paul. For half the farmers of the country it has been great. For the other half, and some of the best, the highest skilled, the most productive farmers of the country, they have lost out by it. This is the direction of travel of EU policy. We have failed collectively as a country, as a sector, to have that policy reflect our positions in that. And I suppose part of the reason for that is that it has been a divide and conquer approach, and it suits EU policy that they want to move towards extensification, a low production model that is environment focused and climate reduction focused through farm to fork as opposed to productive agriculture. And I know, and certainly in discussions you and I have had, we've certainly debated, well look, that boat has sailed now, there's no point talking about it, it's his policy. But I suppose the reality and the point that we would hammer in the journal is, look, that policy was made in a very different world from where we are today. And if the world has changed to the extent that I feel it has, not just in the last 2 years with COVID, but in the last 6 months with war in the Ukraine, then perhaps we should be looking at that policy again. And I know at an EU level there is a debate going on there. Now, I'm not going to start predicting a change to policy, okay. But that is the reality of life with Frank, policy as Frank, it is.
As someone who's been around this territory in terms of the history of the CAP, you know, we had big product support, we had intervention, we had butter mountains. So under the McSherry reforms, we moved to income support and a more market-orientated approach to product. Is the gentleman correct insofar as within the income supports, leaving aside the fact there are more urban voters and, you know, the Minister was right about that, there's less EU money going to be available going forward as a total. Do you detect, as you implement and move forward on the next round of reform, that there is a tangible direction of travel of the subsidies in the impact it's going to have between different farmers?
Look, absolutely. The structure of the new CAP is well known in terms of how it's going to redistribute payments, and there's no doubt it's going to have a big impact on many farmers. I suppose there's probably more winners than losers, or certainly nearly as many, but for those productive farmers, and it is going to be a big impact on them, and you know, it is going to force people to look at their options, and you know, those options are, well, organics is one, dairying is another, but as this gentleman down here said, Flour, like, dairying is not an option in many parts of the country, and you know, the suckler industry, or indeed sheep, is, you know, the best use of that land resource in many parts of the country, and that's why I think it's important that we do try to maintain it and support it. And I suppose, look, you know, we can be all doom and gloom as well, and we shouldn't be like that, because you know, I suppose, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But there's huge benefit to be got from, you know, running your business as best as you can run it with the land resource that you have. Like, we always see the difference between the best and the worst performers, or the lowest quarter and the top quarter is quite substantial. So while suckler beef will never be as profitable as dairy, and at least in my lifetime it hasn't been, and I can't see it for the foreseeable future. And certainly, look, suckler beef on good land versus suckler beef on more marginal land, there is a difference. It still is an enterprise that can return a profit. And I suppose a lot of the farmers we have now that are suckler farmers, they're, you know, a lot of them have off-farm income as well. They're part-time farmers. So it has a role to play. And there is a lot we can do to work inside the farm gate to improve it. And I think both profitability and sustainability, and that's what we should try to go forward with, rather than you know, thinking that the end is nigh. The end is not nigh in my view.
All right, Paul, we'll take two maybe, or three.
Hello. I've been listening to you here now for a while, and I think most of you all are missing the real point. The beef edge, we're here to produce food that's edible and lovely to eat. I talked to a butcher out there today. He's on the stand. He was the first man made good sense to me. I said, what? You're promoting beef to eat. I said, what are the best cattle? What is the best breed of beef? He said, without a doubt, the Hereford. And he said, the Angus is next. There's not one Hereford in this place today. A few years ago, a couple of us sent a bit of Hereford strip line to the World Food Fair in Cologne. And we won the best beef in the world. I've been to restaurants all over this world, from California to Sydney, you name it. And the best restaurants have one thing they advertised: Hereford beef. But here I see was mad to produce continental beef that's almost inedible. And we are all rushing to do it. We know that a Hereford eats 35%. You just look at the research in Montana, going on for 14 years in America. A Hereford eats 35% less than a continental. 35% less. We're talking about marginal land and hard to make money. And we're feeding animals that we have to pump everything into the finish. When the wherever they'll get fit going around the hedges and lie in a hedge and eat. It's a pity that we've lost this notion. What we are is food producers. And we're really, really serious. A good man came to me a while ago and he said, have you heard of it, Bowl? I have. Turned out he was Lord Ivy and his manager. He said, I want to try him on some Charolais. He did it. He has since come back to me and said the cattle he's produced are the best he's ever produced. He has 12,000 acres of land in England. He's a good bit over here to Kilbrew. And he said, this is the best combination I've ever seen. This is fantastic meat. And now he wants another bowl.
All right.
Now, I'm not saying, I'm just saying to you, genuinely, it's the food we eat. It's not a big potato. It's not the biggest potato the size of a mangle. It's a beautiful British Queen now in August. It's a beautiful golden wonder at Christmas. We have to, if we want to sell food worldwide, we got to make a name for producing the tastiest, best beef in the world. And we have it if we only knew it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, sir, we'll just go fairly rapidly because I want to wrap it up at least a 1:45. Yes, sir.
Yeah, look, I suppose, firstly, I just want to compliment Frank and his team on the work that you put in today. I mean, walking around, you couldn't but be impressed, and I want to acknowledge that. But then, Frank, I would expect it as a beef farmer. We are the second largest agricultural sector in this country, and I'm very proud to call myself a beef farmer. And what I don't want to see, and has disappointed me, is a debate on sucklers versus dairying versus dairy beef. I've yet to meet a farmer that I could call a fool. Every farmer tries to do the best for what they see fit with their land. And, you know, it frustrates me. I suppose next month I turn 40, so I'll no longer regard myself as a young farmer. But we have policy decisions that have been taken for our industry, which I find very, very difficult. Walking around trying to follow the Teagasc message for the last 20 years. And those that followed it the most productive, the most intensive, have seen the biggest fall in their income with regard to the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy. But we're here now and we're talking about the environment and what we're going to have to do as a country going forward to meet our obligations. Phelim O'Neill will tell us that in Brazil they're going to expand production hugely. Yet farming in Carlow are going to be expected to reduce. The irony is that we live in the one world. We're getting policy decisions wrong. I'm very proud. I played for Carlow, a county not recognised for either football or hurling. I know what it's like to be an underdog, but doesn't mean you give up. And I would love to think that we can debate and we can argue our point better at a national level, because it makes no sense to me that the most carbon efficient country for producing milk, the 5th for producing beef, is potentially going to be asked to reduce production. So can we try get to a stage where we get to policy that actually works for the world and not policy that's going to make things worse?
Okay. That boat has sailed, my friend, but the gentleman at the back, these are comments which are welcome. Yes, sir.
Minister, sorry, you're not minister now, but you were minister. And
thanks be to God to you.
But at that time, you were asking the farmers to stop producing elephants, and you were fairly good at it. But now then we had a horse meat scandal, and I was wondering, was it between you and them trying to get a fast elephant? But anyway, we're talking about drugs in food and things like that, and the professor mentioned something there. Now, it mightn't be just in the beef, but it's definitely, a person was telling me one time that there was, the profit in the pig industry was the feed producers making it on the drugs they were putting in. I think there has to be a need for a certain amount, but maybe not at the rate they were putting it in. And Michael Biggins there said he'd like to see the meat industry get involved in something. What would that be, Michael? There was a beef tribunal right under your feet, and you slip under the table, and you appeared 4 years later, and what did you say? There was nothing done.
Okay. All right.
There was a little bit done. There was somebody doing something.
All right.
There's no hurry. Sorry.
No, there is a hurry. There is a hurry, sir.
No, sir, sorry. And Frank said to keep up with technology. But if there a certain group in the Formula One would say flying, and there's a certain group stuck in the mud, in the bog, they need a crane to get them out. Are you doing anything about them, or do they count? Are they non-citizens? Are they non-farmers? Frank, wake up.
They all count for us.
Yeah, well,
we're here to support every farmer in the country.
That's a political answer. I hope you're right.
All right, I'm going to go straight to you, sir, because I want to give as many people as possible a chance.
Thank you. First of all, just Alice there, I would like to thank you for all the work you're doing behind the scenes. I know a lot of farmers aren't hearing about it, but it's something that had annoyed me for a long time in the landslip. So I'm delighted to see you putting up a bit of a fight, and I'd like to see you keeping that good work up and taking the fight on a bit further. But my question is, like, you know, going around there today, and no matter what board you went to, there seemed to be a theme of the age and reducing animals, the slaughter age for animals. Frank, in the meetings we have been at the last few months and years, Frank talked about all these tools that Teagasc have to help climate change, that we could meet our targets. For farmers, we only need one tool, and that tool is in our pocket, and it's money. And unless we get a bit of money to make the change, we'll never be able to change. So my question is to the panel, for us to be profitable, we're going to need more out of beef. Is there room in the marketplace? Will the consumer, will the government, will somebody provide us with more assistance so that we're in profit? We can't do it if we're not in profit. Profit has to be the whole thing. Farmers have to be sustainable. The profit has to be sustainable to make a change. If we have the money, we can make a change. If we haven't the money, we can do nothing.
Okay, a range of questions there, and I'm going to draw a line under it there, if that's all right. I'm going to start with you, Alice, maybe, because there was an issue there of residues and the antimicrobials and the other things. Is that an issue in terms of Irish red meat or not? And any other point, because I won't be going back to you again, that you want to respond to the general tenor of the comments?
I think the Food Safety Authority, with all their checks and the veterinary process, Irish beef and Irish meat and European meat in general is pretty free of residues. Now, I'm not an expert in that area, but I'm assured that that is the position. I would come to one, I'm absolutely happy that, that red meat in the correct proportions is healthy for human life. But as Frank and I were discussing, there is one other issue that is coming up that I think you should be aware of, that's coming up amongst public health experts. And what they are talking about is if climate change and climate crisis happens, the world will not be a very happy or healthy place. We will have chaos, we will have immigration, we will have violence, we will have famines, we will have extra diseases. So it is becoming a conversation amongst public health and nutrition experts that diets that we eat have to be both healthy and sustainable. And that is an area that red meat is going to have to look at worldwide. Now, absolutely, I hear and I acknowledge that, or it is correct, that Irish beef, in fact, is producing probably a quarter of the emissions that occurs in other countries. But it's got to be totally sustainable in the long run because we can't let climate crisis happen. And this is actually going to influence national dietary guidelines. It's starting to in the Scandinavian countries. Brussels, Germany, Norway are all making moves on it, and the discussion is starting within Ireland as well. So the sustainability data is going to have an impact on the discussions on diet, and that is going to gradually happen in the coming years.
And it's my observation as a completely that the Public Health Coalition and the Environment Coalition are coalescing increasingly, whether we like it or not. Michael, a number of comments, a number of things, or anything you want to get off your chest?
Well, first of all, and my first comment was the most important reason for me getting involved in St. Paul's Farm was profit. You know what I mean? To see inside my farm gate, to see, and I said that's every farmer's goal, like to make his farm as profitable as possible. I absolutely have nothing to do with dividing farmers as regards dairy and beef. I was disgusted yesterday with that comment. I do take a certain amount of comfort from the fact that the Minister said it here earlier as well, that he wasn't asking any sector to reduce production, as indeed the Commissioner said at the IFA National Council a few weeks ago, that he actually thanked Irish farmers for producing enough food to feed 40+ million people worldwide. And we do it in a sustainable way. And as I said, one of the the main reason I got into the Signpost Farms was to see is there a way of doing it more sustainably, because that's where we need to be at. And we've talked about it earlier as regards around the stands there today. What I want to make it quite clear, what I was asking the meat industry to do was to come up. We've seen one of the co-ops only this week come up with an offer of €400 for fertilizer. And I'm talking about a West of Ireland co-op. So what I'm saying, if there's going to be talking about putting feed additives to cattle, that's what, the meat industry, which we are sustaining with our produce, they need to step up to the plate for it. That was my comment on that.
And as I always say, in relation to the suckler debate, in fairness, there were suckler cows before there was cars. So who
definitely
did cause this problem in the first place? I'm going to leave the last word to Frank, because I want you to sum up on the day and the forum and the Minister. I think it's been a fabulous day. Phelim, a number of questions there.
I just want to pick up on the point about money here, which is, I think what anyone that has came to this excellent day today will have been about is how to make their business more efficient. And in terms of money in your pocket, the reality of life is that for the best, most productive suckler farmers of the country and beef finishers, the reality is that the support mechanism that has been in place for them has been eroded over the past 10 years to the point where it is now essentially no longer viable. The only other source of revenue then is the marketplace. And for a short period in June this year, the Irish beef price was at the top of the beef exporting countries in the world. And that was a nice and a good place to be. But even then, it was still a very marginal business. I don't think that the market can return enough, certainly in the short term and the medium term, to fill that gap that has been left there. That is the economic reality of it. Will we have a beef industry then? Well, look, the reality is there's such a big swathe of our country and farming population that it is the only viable option, beef and sheep production. So therefore that business will continue as probably a part-time enterprise. But no, I struggle to be positive in terms of the market stepping forward to replace the income that is lost in some of the very high volume farms of the country. But conversely, that transfer of income will make other farms that perhaps were less viable, not viable, and less productive farms will now make those viable. So it is, if you like, something of a changing of the guard there.
Okay, Frank, a number of points. I am getting the message here that the suckler industry does feel like the forgotten Cinderella almost, that their position is declining. The numbers in terms of the National Livestock Survey do indicate that decline. Do you feel what we've learned today gives a positive response to that?
Look, the suckler industry, certainly many farmers have got out of it in the last couple of years. Logically, there was an opportunity for some of them to get into dairy, and look, that's just the reality. But that doesn't mean, and I keep saying this, that the suckler beef industry, or the suckler part of our beef industry, is a sunset industry. It still is an industry that has a huge amount to offer to the country and to the people, the 70,000 people that have sucklers on their farm, and to all the other parts of the industry, the processing, the inputs and so on, that depend on that. So look, a gentleman down there said that I can't remember the exact point he was making, but are we committed to people that are in less marginal areas? And look, we certainly are. We're committed to farming in all parts of the country and to all enterprises. And for the suckler industry, or the suckler sector, we launched our Future Beef programme about 6 months ago. It's part of the Signpost programme. It's the part that Michael is involved in, and that's, look, our commitment to sucklers is rock solid, in that we want to support farmers that are involved in suckling to make as much profit. And look, I'm sure people will have noticed the big focus on sustainability here today, and greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, and certainly, Teagasc is putting that very high up on our priority list. But we're not naive enough to think that that's the priority of farmers. Obviously, farmers, the first thing you've got to do is make your businesses as profitable and as financially viable as you can. So we are very conscious when we talk about technologies to reduce emissions, that they have to be technologies that save money or improve profit. And in general, they are. Now, some of the future technologies that we're working on, like feed additives, as Michael says, they are going to cost money. And that is a question, how are they going to be paid for? Because there's not the profit in the industry to pay for that additional cost unless there's an additional return for the produce that's produced with that. So look, in terms of summing up, we certainly have a new challenge. Like, the beef sector is always facing challenges. I'm kind of working, nearly 40 years, in sort of either studying or working in the industry. And over that time, the beef industry has always been challenged by profitability, and that remains today. And that requires the farmers to use their ingenuity to do the best they can, and with the support of the likes of us, for them to try to do the best they can. But we have this new challenge on the block now, which is environmental sustainability, and in particular climate change. And as I said at the start, we cannot ignore it for 3 reasons. One, regulation won't allow us ignore it. The law of the land has committed to these targets. 2, it's the right thing to do, and by and large, I think every citizen in the country wants to do the right thing, and so we have to address the climate challenge. But 3, there's the opportunity bit, and I want to come back to that, because when we say it's the right thing to do, are we Boy Scouts, and we're very naive, and people talked about Brazil, Phelim, you talked about Brazil increasing their beef production by 4 times as much as what we produce, and that's a real, the world is a real imperfect place. And we can throw our hands at it and say, to hell with it, we're going to do nothing, or we can do the best we can. And that brings us back to the opportunity, because I do think there is an opportunity for Ireland, not just the beef sector, but for Irish food production, to differentiate itself as the best in class in relation to environmental sustainability. So for that triumvirate of things, the opportunity, the right thing to do, and also the fact that the regulator is there, it is an issue we have to address. And we can address it. I suppose that's the message I would like people to go home with, that this is not a hopeless challenge. We face challenges every day in our lives and our businesses. And once there's ways to meet those challenges, I think people, they're up for that challenge by and large, I think. And I suppose it's our job, and you can be rest assured that we will be working very hard at it to help you to meet these challenges. And we are prioritising this as the issue, I suppose, for the next decade. And I'm optimistic by nature, and I'm not going into this challenge thinking that failure is going to meet us halfway. I think we can get there as an industry.
Okay, I'm going to leave the last word to you, Frank. I think by many of these people are involved in international panels. Their opinions are sought after. It has been a top-class panel. So please maybe show your collective appreciation for Phelim, Frank, Alice and Michael. The final thing I want to do is there's a guy standing up over there called Paul Crossan, and he sent me about 700 pages of briefing material for today, and I want to thank you, Paul, and all your team here at Grange. I certainly was bowled over by it. I've been several hours here, and I just want to say on behalf of you all that you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you, Liam, for your skillful chairmanship of Teagasc. 170 million of taxpayers' money is really well spent in Teagasc, in my opinion, and I think they're there to serve you. So that concludes the forum. Thank you for being such a great audience.